Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations episode number 87. I'm your host, Joe Hannan, Joe from Jersey. It's going to be a solo podcast. I haven't done one of those in a while. I hope you all have enjoyed the interviews that I've been doing. I'm trying to do more of those, bringing on people who I think their views and insights could benefit the Jiu-Jitsu community as a whole. And I'm intentionally focusing on people who aren't necessarily traditional authorities in the field. Maybe if they're black belts who are certainly accomplished in their own right, but maybe they're not world champions. I'm not afraid to bring on people who are not black belts either, unlike some podcasts. And I think, if anything, the CJI and ADCC have revealed to us the increasing irrelevance of rank in jiu-jitsu from a skill standpoint. And the character of certain grapplers in our art has certainly been self-evident in terms of the irrelevance of rank in terms of character. So let's not put too much stock in rank. Let's put stock in the quality of jiu-jitsu and the quality of the human being behind it. That's tack that up on the wall, I suppose, is sort of the BJJ Meditations mission around here. But it's good to be back on a solo episode. I feel like I've been marinating on a bunch of things that I want to talk about in this episode for a while now. So it could just be a messy smorgasbord of topics, or it could be something great. I suppose that's the magic or the disorder of this podcast, depending on how you look at it. I suppose there are many disorders associated with this podcast. If you're of the psychological set, feel free to send me your thoughts. Anyway, how am I doing? You might be interested in how I'm doing. You might not give a shit. If that's the case, feel free to skip over this part. My ankle is still meh. It's like not great. It's been a really long-term injury. If you remember, tore my ankle up the night before I left for Worlds, and it's still not great. And this is despite doing some rehabilitative work on my own and not aggravating it. Like, I haven't been running. I've been wearing an ankle brace when I train. There's been no moment on the mats where I say to myself, oh, that didn't feel good. It's just getting old. Getting old, I think, is what this is. It's a lower extremity injury. Lower extremities tend to not get a lot of circulation just by virtue of the fact that, gravity is gravity and they're kind of low on the body. So I feel like it's stalled out. Got to get some physical therapy going on that. But as I'll mention in this podcast, I've been extremely busy lately, so it's been hard to even schedule physical therapy. Other happenings in my life, I finally completed something I've been working on since July. I earned my certified personal trainer certification from the National Academy of Sports Medicine. It was very challenging. And when the certification process concluded, I found out I passed my test. They run you through this exit interview to learn more about you and your background. And so many of the questions they asked pertain to people with degrees in sports and exercise science or biology. And only then did it occur to me just how out of my league I was in taking this on, but I got it done, and I feel like I earned an undergraduate degree in sports and exercise science in like 5 months or however long it took me to do this. Very challenging, but I have the certification, and one of the reasons why I've been so eager to do this for many years now is because I feel like, fortunately, there are more people coming into jiu-jitsu and more people from the sports and exercise side of the equation who are coming into jiu-jitsu. So they understand programming for jiu-jitsu and they understand the demands of the sport better than perhaps a trainer who has never done it themselves. But these people are still farther and fewer between. So I'm trying to position myself in the school as having some expertise to help people prepare themselves for the mats, just because if you look at like one of the leading causes of injury among athletes, generally speaking, I imagine if you looked at this in jiu-jitsu, this would be true as well. It's deconditioning, and deconditioning doesn't necessarily mean that you're out of shape. There are plenty of people who come to jiu-jitsu and they're in great shape, but they're not conditioned for jiu-jitsu. I'm a good example of this. I was recently in Central America and I was doing a bunch of surfing and training jiu-jitsu, and the surfing just kicked my ass, because I surf like 2 or 3 times a year. This is not something I do often, and I'm in really good shape, but I am deconditioned for surfing. So when you go into any sport, regardless of how demanding it is, if you're deconditioned for that sport, your risk of injury goes up. And I think that this is especially true in jiu-jitsu because it's a contact sport and the intensity is much higher than so many other sports. We're not playing pickleball here. So we have many people who come to jiu-jitsu who have never done a sport in their life, many who are out of shape and are looking to jiu-jitsu to give them better health. And we have some still who are in decent shape, but they're not fully prepared for the demands that the sport is going to place on them. Therefore, their injury risk is high. And my goal as a trainer in this regard is not only to teach people jiu-jitsu, but to teach them how to prepare their bodies for the demands of jiu-jitsu so they could have longevity and so they can lower their injury risk. And I say this as somebody who came into the sport as being extremely skinny and extremely injury prone. And only after I took on physiological training and transformation did knock on wood here, my ankle is messed up. Only after I took that on did my injury risk seem to go down, and did I stop suffering so many injuries? Did I have so many overuse injuries? And the other sort of equation of why I'm taking this on too is postural distortions. A lot of us, especially for those of you like me who sit at a chair like this all day doing computer work, we have bad movement patterns just from sitting, from this sedentary style of life. And jiu-jitsu exacerbates a lot of those patterns. For example, if you're a guard player, like I enjoy playing guard, and you sit at a desk all day, chances are your entire hip complex is short from sitting all day. And then you're going into that contracted position even more when you're playing guard. So you're kind of dumping gas on the fire there. And then if you lack proper core stability on top of that, that's a pretty good recipe for some sort of catastrophic injury. So anything I can do from a coaching standpoint to reduce that risk for people, to better prepare them for the demands of jiu-jitsu, and to just make sure they have longevity in the sport. Like I want everybody to get to black belt. I want to do. So it's a big reason why I picked up that certification. And if you're listening to this podcast and those are topics that you are interested in working with me on, by all means, reach out. Or if you just want information on any of those topics, let me know, reach out. Same thing for any students in the school. I'm happy to talk about this at any time. And we have some other great trainers in our ecosystem. Like Katia Silva is my personal trainer. I owe a huge debt of gratitude for her for all the help she's done for me over the years. We've got Mike Valkersell, who runs Locomotion, amazing gym that emphasizes functional fitness. Mike really gets it, and he's somebody I turn to quite often for guidance or expertise. It doesn't matter who it is. I just kind of want you to avail it. Well, it does matter who it is. It should be somebody who knows what they're talking about, and it should be somebody who's a good human being. The people I just mentioned are. But I just want you to get the information you need to be healthy and enjoy jiu-jitsu and spend less time injured is what it comes down to. So that's what I've been up to. And as a result, I haven't had much time for really anything. The prep process for this certification test was really intense. Studied harder for it than probably anything I've ever studied hard for before. Maybe Latin in college comes close. But man, just every day I would wrap up my workday and spend at least an hour and a half going through the course. And then once I had gotten through the course, at least an hour and a half testing myself, quizzing myself, using ChatGPT to quiz myself even further on the areas I didn't know. And there was not much time for anything. And I really felt like the presence I had with my family, my wife and my son had really deteriorated. And I'm coming out on the other side of this certification process with this appreciation for time, perhaps, that I didn't have before. Specifically, I was in the shower the other morning and I had this realization. For whatever reason, the shower tends to be where I have many realizations. I think because the default mode network of the brain is engaged. But I had this realization that this feeling that I get, that the older I get, the less time I have, is literally true. My life is getting busier, but also the older I get, the closer I am to dying. This is a universal truth for all of us. It's inescapable. It's kind of a no shit statement, but for me, it was a profound realization. Like, oh, this is more than just a feeling. It's more than just a feeling, right? Like there's a literal constraint attached to this that I cannot escape. I cannot buy myself more time. There's a date somewhere in a book in Valhalla with my name on it, and that's my date. That's my time to go, and I don't know when it's going to be. But this realization grounded me and forced me to be present in perhaps a way that I haven't been for a while, as I've been hyper focused on pursuing the certification, hyper focused on pursuing competition in jiu-jitsu. That being said, I'm still kind of raging against the dying light here. I'm still putting out this podcast. I'm still, putting my heart and soul into the consulting work with Emily and Josh. And there are so many things I want to do and so many things I want to accomplish. But in this realization that I have less time, that's literally true, it raised this question of, okay, I'm pursuing these things hard, but am I missing what really matters? I had this moment prior to Cormac going to his swimming lesson the other day with Francis. Usually I take Cormac to swimming, and he loves to swim. It's a nerve-wracking experience for me, even though there are lifeguards everywhere. He's with 2 swim instructors, and they do an amazing job. But when you're watching your small child in the water and they don't know how to swim, even if they're surrounded by all these people, you can't help but feel anxious. And he came into the room and gave me a hug before he went to swimming. And I just thought to myself, like, wow, this could be the last time that I ever get a hug from my son. Like, something could happen to either of us, right? I'm really going to cherish this moment. I had a similar moment, which I talked about if you listen to the discussion of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, where he had an allergic reaction to peanuts and I had to give him his EpiPen and rush him to the hospital. And it just made me realize all the sort of trivial strife that comes along with being a parent that had happened that morning was meaningless compared to the fact that that could have been our last day together. And I had this experience over and over again every time I went out surfing when I was in Central America with Emily and Josh. Every time I went out on the water, I thought to myself, this could be the last time this could be my last day. This could be the last day I ever spoke to Cormac and Francis, and I'm on the other side of the world and I'm far away from them. I could hit my head on a reef and die, or a shark could eat me, or whatever. Fortunately, none of those things happened. But surfing with a messed up ankle is hard. Let me tell you that. Regardless, this realization is really present with me. And it's also really present with me in my jiu-jitsu training right now, because there's so much I want to do. I'm in this downtime right now, this between seasons time, where there's so much stuff I want to learn, and there's so much stuff I want to do in each training session. And I'm asking myself right now, as I'm riffing alone here in my house to you, what am I missing in my haste to do all this stuff? They say, like, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I've heard that expression come from special forces people, heard it come from many fields. But I'm wondering, like, what am I missing? What is sloppy in my jiu-jitsu due to haste? Because this psychological tension is probably manifesting in my technical presence on the mat too. So what am I doing in a sloppy way because of haste? And it also begs this bigger question too, like, how might I use my time more strategically to be more impactful? And this kind of correlates to the work I do more broadly in the consulting work. There's this phenomenon I've observed since my time in the newspaper industry and kind of in general, where work tends to expand to fill the volume of the container. So you give a reporter an assignment and you give them a week to do it. They could easily do the same assignment, maybe even better, if you gave them 3 hours to do it. And in some ways, it's more of an acute stressor to do the thing in 3 hours, but the sort of slow grind of the stress isn't there. So the net stress, I think, ends up being lower in the smaller container, if that makes sense. And, my time container is shrinking. There's just no way around that. And I think that children in general, being a parent, really makes you present to this in a way that I wasn't present to it beforehand. Because, generally speaking, I think before I had children, I thought I was busy. I thought I didn't have much time. But if you're listening to this podcast and you don't have children, you have way more time than you realize. You just need to reevaluate sort of the size of the container and embrace these constraints, because I think constraints are generally good. constraints force us to pay attention in ways that we might not otherwise. It forces us to accomplish things in 30 minutes that typically might take us an hour and a half. And so much of this just boils down to like how we structure our days, how we structure our training. And I just recently had to overhaul the entire structure of my day as my responsibilities professionally are evolving. And last week was sort of an experiment. I didn't know how I was going to feel, if I was going to feel better or worse. And I accomplished more last week. I was more active than I've been mentally, physically than I have been in a long time. But at the same time, I felt so much better. And I think it's because I truly mastered the container. And this is both in my jiu-jitsu training and in my professional work. So I had, more windows for focused work, for training and for rest, literally going on my calendar, blocking these things out, giving myself like 10 minutes of downtime between each one, 5 minutes of downtime between each one. And then sort of looking at my day and saying like, what are the most important things? What requires the most creative energy? And what sort of, when do I have the most creative energy? This is what Josh calls day architecture. So really just like taking that, it's something I've done all my life, but it's something you have to revisit as your life goes through seasons and cycles. And this is something I do with my training too. I try to put my jiu-jitsu training at times in the day where it makes the most sense for me to be training. And I try to go into each of those sessions with intentions. This is where I think something like Sherpa Journal, what Josh Liu came on the podcast and talked about his app, Sherpa Journal, a little while ago. I think something like that is a game changer if you really need to dial in this focus that I'm talking about. Even if you just do it on paper, traditional paper journal, that's fine. But figure out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it and set the intention to really just kill it during that window. And so just taking this more aggressive approach to scheduling, and it's much more than just this aggressive focused approach to scheduling. It's a greater presence in my life across the board, because like when I'm not working, I can truly sit down and be present with my family. But this is all leading to more focused work. It's leading to more focused training. And I think it's actually slowing me down. Even though I have more output, I'm busier on the surface, it's actually slowing me down, not speeding me up. It's forcing me to be smooth, and smooth is fast. And I'm just hoping that as I go through this process, that I'm missing fewer of those moments like I had prior to swimming with my son, or I'm missing fewer moments on the mats to really engage with the students, or I'm missing fewer moments to just give my wife a hug and a kiss when she needs it. And that's really what it's all about, right? It's the examined life, as we talk about on this podcast. It's so much more than jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is simply a way for us to train all of these things at once. So I think that's all I've got for you this week. Once again, thank you for listening. I will most likely announce a merch drop next week. A lot of you have asked me over, I don't even know how long I've been doing this podcast. I think maybe a year and a half or something like that. I got to go back and look. But many of you have asked about merchandise and whether I could get some shirts together, and they are together. And if you are a student at Princeton BJJ, you've had exclusive access to those shirts. Soon, probably next week, they will be available to the podcast audience. I'll put them on the BJJ Meditations website for sale. There are two designs. One is from my good friend Jamie, who's a black belt at Princeton BJJ. He did the logo for the school. And then the other is from Yago of Power Trip fame, who was on the podcast 2-3 weeks ago. One's charcoal gray. The Jamie design is charcoal gray, and Yago's is white. I believe the Jamie design is on a next level tri-blend, and then we went with the Gildan Hammer, more traditional punk-inspired shirt for the Yago shirt. I love both of them. I hope you guys love them too. And that's the best way to support the podcast, is to buy a shirt and rep it and just tell people about BJJ Meditations. I started doing this podcast to find the others, to find the like-minded people in the sport and to elevate the discussion around the culture. And that takes a village, right? And I'm welcoming you into the village if that sounds like you, or if that sounds like anybody you know. Other than that, we've got book club, PBJJ book club number 2, open to, of course, BJJ Meditations listeners. I'm rescheduling that. to Sunday, November 24th. It'll be at 7:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. There's a Zoom option for listeners of the podcast. Of course, if you are interested in attending in person, you can if you're in the New Jersey area, or if for some reason you want to make a road trip to New Jersey, that's fine too. The registration link will be in the show notes, but look out on Instagram for the t-shirt drop announcement. That'll be coming out very soon. And if not, I'll put it in the show notes for the next episode. But that's all I've got for you this week, folks. Thank you very much for listening. Train well, and I will see you next week.